Howdy guys and gals, y'all know that I love to do all these gun reviews and optics reviews and all this fun stuff, doing different challenges, but this is actually the most important video that I've ever produced, and I'd really like for you to pay close attention to this. This is coming for all of us, and so I encourage you to share this with as many people as you can, especially if they have kids in their lives, ones that might be heading back into schools or other institutions sometime very soon. As many of you know, I am called the Social Regressive, and I have two big reasons for calling myself this. The most important one is that I oppose social progress to its core. The social progress movement is thoroughly rotten right down to its roots, all the way to every little expression of itself, and I oppose it for reasons historical, moral, spiritual, logical, and in this case, personal. My story starts in the 4th grade when we moved to Hawaii. It was a bit of a culture shock for me. I didn't know quite what to make of the students. We were in a totally different state. Very different culture, different way of doing things, and then I was also going to public school for the first time, so it was pretty weird. I'd gone to these private Christian schools all before that, and then suddenly I'm in a public school situation that's quite foreign, so I didn't know quite what to make of a lot of the students there. They didn't know quite what to make of me, but aside from that, 4th grade was probably pretty normal. But then came 5th grade, and the arrival of a little woman from California named Miss Tamashiro. I don't know how old she was. I think she was a bit on the young side at the time. It's kind of tough for children, I think, to be able to tell some of those differences. And I don't know what in the world her qualifications were. I don't know if she had any kind of teaching degree. I don't know if she was a counselor of some type. She didn't seem to actually be any of those things. She was something entirely else that I figured out over time, and especially getting on through high school and kind of looking back on this, I began to realize that she's something that we used to call a commissar. This is someone that in your Soviet countries was a representative of the state. She was someone that was there to enforce leftist socialist policy. She was there to set the tone, kind of be a representative of the big state, to kind of be in charge of education, sort of things, to make sure that everything's heading in the right direction. Someone that is a political activist that's there to shape the culture out there and force people to comply. And that is exactly what she did at our school. I don't know what the other teachers thought of her, but suddenly everybody was kind of under her thumb. She had her fingers in everything, from the gifted and talented program all the way through just the way that day-to-day things were done. I don't know who in the world gave her that kind of power, but she ended up with it, and we all had to deal with it. My first dealing with her was in these library sessions, where our classes were taken one by one to the library to sit on mats, and we were given special education that was outside what you might consider the actual role of a public school. If you think of what a public school is actually there to do, or any school at all, we're there to learn reading, writing, arithmetic. We're supposed to be learning how to think, hopefully. And, of course, we have history and all that. And then what she would do is add that little something extra. So we started learning about certain figures in history that were handpicked by her from probably mostly the somewhat recent past. So I remember one of the first ones that we got into was the message of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm actually very happy that she got into this one, because it was one that I latched onto immediately. Being a Christian, having gone to, those private schools and having, kind of lived under a pew all my life, I immediately kind of latched onto his message, which is the same one that Jesus and the apostles preached, that there is, that there's total equality between people in the eyes of God, that we're no longer Jew or Gentile, we're no longer, slave or free, that all of us are responsible to God alone, and that we need to make our actions and our thoughts kind of reflect that accordingly. And so, yeah, I just latched right onto that message. It made a whole lot of sense. And I just loved that, he was bringing everything out of this feeling of love for each other, that we actually need to be working together, not of creating new schisms, not about revenge. It was all about bringing people together. And he actually did a really good job at that. But then the very next session that we had, if I remember correctly, because I remember this great big dissonance, was the message of Malcolm X. And Miss Tamashiro was pitching both of these messages to us, in elementary school as equal messages, that both of them were equally valid. And I remember coming out of that session thinking that, okay, this man who believes in, trying to create equality and us working together, that how am I supposed to reconcile this other guy that's looking for revenge and power? How am I supposed to, work with these two? So for probably the next, few hours, it could have been a day or two, I was trying to figure out, which one of these guys had it right, because, of course, she's presenting Malcolm X's message as, perfectly awesome, this is a great way to do things. And actually, in these sessions, she actually taught us to be racist, and she actually used those words. She taught us what she called reverse racism, and that reverse racism was fine. That white people, especially, had power for too long, and that revenge against them, putting them down in order to elevate others, was just fine. So that's where I first heard the terms reverse racism, affirmative action. All of this came from her mouth first. And I'm hearing all this in a vacuum. There's nobody else at the school that is providing a counterpoint. There's nobody that's daring to speak up against this lady. The teacher would actually be standing right there next to Miss Tamashiro and either believing what she says or at least tacitly going along with it. And so I'm having to figure all this out for myself. All of the students in here are trying to figure it out for themselves. And I could watch them as we sang little songs to some of these figures, like the little song to Martin Luther King Jr. or a chant from Muhammad Ali. Some of the stuff that you guys may have seen coming out of schools during Obama's time, certain similar things that are really quite disturbing. But I'm a very quiet kid, so I didn't talk about this with my parents. I didn't go home and start talking about, what we had learned. Think about it. When you go home at school at the end of the day, your parents usually ask, "Hey, what'd you learn today?" And you go, "Nothing." Or, "What'd you do today?" "Nothing." And then you go out and play. And that's kind of the way that things worked. But up here, I was trying to mull all this over in my head, trying to reconcile the various strange, disturbing messages. I mean, think about it from a kind of a personal angle first. If I was being taught that white people were evil and that we needed to be put down, that we needed to be reduced in order for other people to flourish, then I'm looking at my own skin and thinking, everybody's looking back at me because I'm one of only 2 people in my classroom that's white. This is not producing anything good. This is, number one, it's totally antithetical to what we had talked about before, which sounded pretty darn good. And then, on a personal level, I'm suddenly to be one that, people are going to be getting revenge on, even though I, as an innocent person, haven't done anything. So whatever connection that I had to some of these messages, eventually, little by little, I started to logically ferret them out, that these were a problem. Miss Tamashiro was lying to us, and that she was creating something that was well and truly evil. And she was starting to turn everybody against each other. This was not about equality. This was not about leveling playing fields. This was about revenge. This was about forcing other people to do things. And especially, as I could tell little by little, it was the force of the state. She was trying to create a more powerful government. She was creating new Democrat voters, and I'm not ashamed to say that we know exactly where a lot of these attacks are coming from. She was creating new Democrat, leftist voters, and she probably created a pretty good block out of that school, as long as people weren't thinking about it too much. So little by little, I just started rejecting her message. Again, I held on to, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message, but the other ones, I just shoved them straight out because it became very obvious over time that this was all about power. It was all about theft. It was just 100% messed up. In another video or two, I'll talk about some of the special events that she had us do that were especially disturbing. They're kind of more topical, so we'll get into those in another one. For now, we'll turn our sights on the Gifted and Talented program because I had very good grades in school. I was not maybe so great at math sometimes. It kind of depended on the teacher, but for the most part, I had very good grades. And I was very interested in learning. I wasn't one that was just there to get the job done and, barely squeak through. I actually wanted to learn all the things that we were doing, and I'm pretty sure that I was especially gifted in writing and reading. I've always been very good with English. And so she brought me into their Gifted and Talented program, which she was now kind of the head of. This is a program that had existed before, and it was about teaching accelerated math, science, reading, and doing all kinds of special projects for those that wanted to go a little bit further. But now she was in charge, and she turned it into something else entirely. Little by little, as we started getting into, we did some cool science projects, we did some extra things that were, in line with what the Gifted and Talented program probably used to be. But then it also started to get a little bit weird. We started hearing these tremors about upcoming role-playing sessions, about certain things that we were going to be doing in there that were her new additions. And I think that my parents pulled me out of the Gifted and Talented program at that point. And who knows, by that point, Miss Tamashiro might have figured out that I was not susceptible to her message and then kicked me out of the Gifted and Talented program after that. I think it was my parents that pulled me out, but you'll actually probably see their comments down below. They watch my videos too, so we'll see what they had to say about the whole thing. In later years, as I looked back on that Gifted and Talented program, I began to realize what it actually was, and that was a commissar factory. It was a way to create new leftist elites, and then eventually probably to be able to kind of put them into different positions in the community, in various jobs. One of the things that maybe some of you have heard about is that if you have this mindset, if you come up through the right schools, if you have the right education, which I probably would have had a little bit of a faster track toward, I'm sure she would have loved to have moved some folks over to UC Berkeley, then from there, you can end up in the right places at the right times. That's how you get jobs for the New York Times. That's how you get into some of these special arrangements in politics. Think about President Obama, someone that apparently, he doesn't seem to have much skill with much, but, he was someone that was at least trained and, kind of brought up, actually kind of pushed into position in order to do some of these things. And his title, community organizer, is just another word for commissar. Think about it. He's a representative of the state to the people, and from the people to the state. And it's kind of like this weird sort of atheist pastor, someone that kind of performs a lot of the same functions as a religious pastor, just kind of applied to the state instead of to God. But for whatever reason, mine, my parents, or Miss Tamashiro's, I was out of the Gifted and Talented program. The next time that I had big interactions with her would have been in the 6th grade, the next time. And we were continuing to have some of these strange sessions, and I was tuning them out, or at least, I was listening to what they had to say and rejecting the messages that came along with them. But one day I was coming back from, I think it was recess or maybe some time in the library doing something else, and then I see all of these students come streaming out of one of the classrooms, and all of them are crying. And my friends and I were looking at each other, because this was the classroom right next to us, another 6th grade classroom. We had 4 of them. We were number 2 in the line, and number 1, everybody is coming out bawling their eyes out. And we're just looking at each other like, what did they do? How could a whole class get in trouble this big? What is going on? And then I think it was classroom number 4 that we saw them, within the next few days, they came streaming out, and they were all crying. And we're really starting to get freaked out. Is this some kind of inquisition? Are they trying to figure out, did somebody do something wrong and they're trying to figure out who it is? What is going on here? And then it came to the turn from my class. And what happened is one day Miss Tamashiro came in with the aid of my teacher, who up to that point I had respected. We pushed all of the tables and chairs off to the sides of the classroom. We put mats on the floor, and then Miss Tamashiro told us all a story about a guy who had bottled up all of his rage and then had gone out and shot up a playground full of school children. And of course, hearing this story, think about a stranger walking up to your kid and telling them about somebody that was really angry and shot up a bunch of kids their age on the playground. That's not something that I would allow a stranger to do. I think if the parents had known a lot of the things that Miss Tamashiro was doing, probably some of them would have approved, as you're going to find out here in the near future in your own schools. But there would have been lots that would have been utterly horrified. So what she did is she made us all think about the traumas in our lives, about the bad things that had happened to us, and we were supposed to cry about them. If we happened to mention those traumas to Miss Tamashiro, that was fine. But we were at least encouraged to think about them and to start crying, to release it, to let it go, so that we could deal with all this bottled up rage and we wouldn't become psycho killers. Do any of you have a problem with this idea? I know I sure did. So I sat there. I was the only one in that class. And in fact, I'll bet I was the only one in that entire grade, that whole 6th grade kind of building, those 4 classes that we had right there. I was the only one that sat there and refused to do what she said. I was actually quite livid at the time. And my teacher, who, like I say, I had respected up to that point, and I did not respect after that point, was actually trying to help. She was trying to also coax me, kind of like good cop, bad cop. These 2 women kneeling down in front of me or squatting down in front of me, trying to tell me to release my anger and to cry. And I know at the time, I'm thinking in my head, they think that I am this psycho because I'm not crying right now. And of course, I had things that I could think about at the moment, things that I didn't like, things that had happened to me, things that I didn't want to happen again. But not that I didn't want to, cry. It's not like I was one of those people that's just completely averse to crying, but I knew that what she was doing was hideously wrong. I didn't know why at the time, but what she was doing was just plain wrong, and I refused to do it. And in the end, I walked out. Even though they tried to browbeat me the whole session, I would not do it. And actually, I kind of preached the gospel to them. I told them that no, I have been forgiven for my own transgressions. I have prayed that others, be forgiven for the things that they have done. I've tried to forgive others in my own life, and I'm not going to take this time to cry this out. So that was my own little rebellion right there. And after that, I don't remember much about Miss Tamashiro. I know she went on to the final classroom and they had their own cry. But after that point, I just kind of switched off everything, did my classwork, and I don't remember much from her after that. Think about what she was doing with all that. She was taking power that was not hers. These sorts of messages are the sort of things that need to be coming from parents and from others that are much closer to our kind of circle of power. As children, we're pretty powerless, and we're supposed to be listening to various sources. But think about the ones that are most impactful for us. Number one, it's our parents. It's going to be our local community, our local church. And then after that, you start getting into lesser degrees of power. And school, in this case, really wanted to be one of those stronger ones. And they were definitely taking on a role that they should not have. And this is something that is coming for you either right now or very soon when kids restart. Right now, we have a lot of teachers that have come up through the universities that have been trained by people a lot like Miss Tamashiro and her teachers. Remember that the attempt by the socialists to ruin the U.S. was to go for the universities first. You train the teachers, and then from there, you can get them into positions of power where they can, start to influence everybody else and, create a new voter bloc, create someone that is much more susceptible to the messages of the left, to create people that are going to take certain actions when the time comes. And when your kids go back to school here very soon, they're probably going to be given some of the same education that I'm mentioning right here. This is 30 years ago. I was just kind of a precursor. I was one that went through this program beforehand, and I want to let you know what's actually heading in your direction. I live in Oklahoma now, reddest of the red states, and I actually live in the reddest county in that state, and that's something that I'm very proud of. Republicans have led the charge from their very inception to remove slavery, to get rid of the institutional racism, to fight Jim Crow, to fight for equality, And no matter what the Democrats may say, because remember that they're trying to hold two torches at the same time. They're trying to hold Martin Luther King Jr.'s torch, and they're trying to hold Malcolm X's. You can't do those at the same time. That really it has been the Republicans that have taken the Martin Luther King Jr. message and have run with it. But you would think that here in this area with so many churches and with that sort of influence and the patriotism that we have running through here, that everything is fine, right? No, because remember that even though in those coastal areas, that's where we have the concentration of these horrible ideas, the ones that led to a Miss Tamashiro in our school, that it has spread like a disease. That was 30 years ago. It has had plenty of time to blossom. Those colleges and universities were the first to be attacked by the socialists, the first ones to be switched. And so we have a lot of teachers out there in every school right now that are just waiting to be the next little Miss Tamashiro to your kids, or if you don't have kids, to the kids in your neighborhood, your grandkids, whoever it is. And as many of you know, it's also coming for your other institutions. It's coming for your own workplace probably, where you may have to sign off on something to, kind of prove that you are not a horrible, evil person. I've set up the challenge that's coming for you very soon, but what is the actual cure? The first thing that you have to realize is something that the socialists are deathly afraid of. Remember that what they have, what they're trying to create, is a collective. It's a hive where nobody has any individual rights, any individual thoughts, where individuality is pretty much 100% suppressed. It's about matching up with the leadership of the organization and speaking their message and following whatever they say. That's what this is all about. They think that power works this way, that you come from the top and you force everybody down below to do what you want. And in a way, they're right. You can do that. As China and the USSR and all these other guys, North Korea, they have proved that yes, if you have physical power, then sure, you can make people do what you want. But they don't really understand what true values, what a better culture, where these things actually come from. They do not come from the top. They come from me. They come from you. They come from the individual. The individual has the most power, and they have the most influence over every other person in their lives. The institutions start to kind of degrade over time. So you have the individual where, I can have great influence over you. Then we get to the family. Then we get to the community, to the church. You have the local governments. Then you get to the big governments where actually there is less power and there should be less power. And this is how we actually get right action. Individuals like myself need to get their butts back in church. We need to go back and realign ourselves to God. We need to get back into Jesus's message. We need to study the Bible. We need to pray. And that is how we're going to turn all of this back. Not just, the people that are vying for political power right now, being able to turn them back. This is about turning back something that's much bigger than that, something that is the real evil that's in this world, the things that kind of arise from deep within. We need to get ourselves right first. We need to flush out all the things that we need to. We need to repent for some of the things that we've been doing, and we need to start getting back on that right path. From there, once you get one individual that has turned and is heading in the right direction toward equality, toward love, toward doing things in the correct way, toward, power as it should be, and then he can influence a family. That family can influence a community, a church. Once you get a church that's heading in the right direction, you can get a town that's heading in the right direction. And that is how you actually get a culture that's doing things the right way. It's not pressure from the top that works. It's individuals that happen to be doing the right time that produce this kind of large view culture. And when you look at it from the top, that is when you see people doing the right things. That leads us to the one person that socialists are afraid of even more than the individual, and that is God himself. God is not an idea. He is not a collection of best ideas He is not some kind of collective subconscious of, what things we should be doing. We don't go to church to learn how to be better people. We go to church so that we can learn more about this actual person. We go to learn about Jesus, what he actually stood for, what he did, how his forgiveness has been given to us, and how we can give it to other people, how we're supposed to give it to other people, how those that have hurt us are the ones that we need to forgive, and the ones that we've hurt, that maybe they can learn to forgive us as well. God is the bedrock. He is the foundation of a better man, of a better family, of a better community, of a better culture, of better ideas overall. When America is aligned with God, America works. That's when things have been going well for us. When we abandon him, as the leftists have taught us to do, even before there was such a thing as a leftist, before that label was applied, when it was social progressives or whatever they want to call themselves, these folks have been trying to push us off that bedrock for the longest time, and they are just shocked at the negative results that come from that. Our goal is to remain on that foundation. Miss Tomashiros are everywhere. There are going to be a lot of Miss Tomashiros that you're going to run into here in the near future. And all I got to say is that when they do try to push us in one direction, I'm pushing back the other direction. They're not going to realize, they're going to think that I am, a proponent of the bad things that they're trying to get rid of. But what I'd really like to point out instead is that where they are going, there is a very steep cliff and a very far fall all the way to the bottom. So Miss Tamashiro, you can try to push me that direction. I'm pushing back. We are the social regressives. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Even if you didn't like this particular content, go ahead and subscribe. There's probably something coming that's more up your alley. Check out this playlist right here. This is going to have videos in a similar vein to what you just watched. These two videos we cherry-picked for you. And finally, The Social Regressive is on Patreon. So you can become a patron of the Destructive Arts and earn some goodies while helping us to provide high-quality videos just by kicking us a few bucks a month. Thanks a bunch for your patronage.